between 2014 and 2018, the number of international students in Canada increased by 68%. That's huge, 68%. I also want to tell you that technology is changing the way that these applications are processed with immigration. So we've got machine learning, advanced analytics to implement automated tools through the immigration portals and websites, which means my career is changing. I need to change the way that I'm doing immigration law because I need to make sure that it's not just the visa processing, but the compliance as well as the consulting pieces. Approximately 50% of Canada's international students are from India and China. So again, the IES is saying, this is great that we have all of these students coming from both India and China, but we also want to diversify this and make sure that people from other countries feel very welcome to study in Canada as well. And again, this data is also further important because it tells you that immigration is heading towards young people who are educated, preferably in Canada, who have a great understanding of English or French language and who are somewhat integrated into Canadian society. And when you look at this data, what's really interesting is the fact that Express Entry was launched January of 2015. And through Express Entry, which leads to permanent resident status. So it's one of the ways that people go from either working, visiting, or studying in Canada to obtain permanent resident status. That Express Entry portal gives points for age, education inside of Canada, and language ability. So the government has really geared it towards these students who are coming fresh out of university or college or trade schools to getting a job in Canada and then applying for permanent resident status. They want that investment. That's the piece that the government is really seeking to do it. And that's the best way to get permanent resident status to Canada. One of the other things that I find very interesting is the fact that this program, this student mobility piece, so Canadian students are going abroad and Canada's inviting all these international students. It also invites people-to-people relationships because Canada is also a trading partner. We have approximately 91 free trade agreements out there in the world. And approximately 15 of those have immigration provisions in them. So knowing that Canada is a really big trading country, when you have international students coming to Canada, it's really fostering all these relationships as they're up and coming and growing through their employer and businesses. So that's another reason why the government is targeting international students, because the world's getting smaller. So we're going to be doing a lot more work together. And it's also interesting because careers in trade, I think, as we have more free trade agreements coming in, so Canada just saw a few more, we're going to need more careers in negotiations. So how do people negotiate trade agreements? What should be incorporated into them? Things to do around these agreements, so transfer pricing, taxes, customs brokers, of course, immigration, consultants and paralegals helping to move people around the world. So as the world gets smaller and more trade agreements happen, especially trade agreements with more immigration provisions in them, you're going to see a lot more of those careers coming out. What's also interesting is it also tells us that educational institutions need to sort of align and offer programs and incentives that kind of mirror where the government is heading with respect to some of these different things. So as the government heads out into different areas, new countries, trying to entice international students, maybe your educational institution should be doing something similar to make sure you're on that forefront. It also means that there's exciting opportunities for students for personal and professional growth, ability to learn practical skills here in Canada, and programs as educational institutions are looking at what immigration data is telling us. It allows educational institutions to gear programs towards those types of careers and those jobs, which means students can come here and benefit from those types of educational programs, gearing them towards that permanent resident status. So the other thing too, I think, is that as more countries recognize that international students are an important source of human capital and revenue, it also means that we have to be a bit more creative. So marketing and communication strategies, I think, are going to be very important. You can't market like you used to. I don't know anyone under the age of 30 who really grabs a hold of a newspaper, an old-fashioned newspaper. There's apps out there now to gear people towards various institutions, maybe advertising with TikTok video clips, WeChat in certain countries. So changing the way that your marketing strategies are going to be has to be important. Scholarships. So EduCanada, which is a joint federal and provincial collaboration, is offering scholarships. So institutions have to apply on behalf of the international student for most of these. So look into EduCanada to see what kind of opportunities there might be for international students to come to Canada. And also making sure institutions offer those cutting edge programs. Making sure that, robotics, blockchain. I read a really interesting article about blockchain and farming the other day. So, making sure you stay up and on top of those cutting edge technologies and offer programming towards that becomes very important, because it also means that those students are leaving into future careers. So, the student direct stream, I want to highlight this for a particular reason. And that is, the government, again, is trying to diversify and get students to come to Canada. So you've got $21.6 billion impacting our economy for international students. That means that other countries like Australia, New Zealand, and a few others have recognized that significant financial impact that international students have on an economy, and they want a piece of it. The only way to make sure that Canada stays ahead of the curve is to make sure that we offer faster study permit processing than the rest of the world. So the Student Direct Stream was specifically created to make sure that students who are applying from these select countries get their study permits faster. It also tells you where the government is going to look for new students, where they think that the data is showing that these students are going to come to Canada and participate in the international student economy. So Pakistan was added in July of 2019. Senegal and Morocco were added in September of 2019. They're both the Francophone pitch. So is your educational institution offering programs in French? Maybe a question you need to ask, or something to consider down the road. And although that we're not looking at how students are getting the study permits in this particular seminar, it's important to note that the government is looking to expand this in 2021. So that means that they've identified other countries that they can tap into to really invite students to come to Canada. That means a lot of growth. So this is definitely an area of growth. I still see it even after COVID, because it's really about an investment in Canada's long-term future. Canada's almost 100% dependent upon immigration for our future, our long-term future, because of the negative birth rate. So if you look at go to the StatsCan website and look, you'll see immigration plays that significant role. And the government wants people who are young, adept, technologically savvy, they're ready to go and start their careers from the get-go here in Canada. That's the big focus. It also lets us know that it lets us know where educational institutions need to advertise and what kinds of programs, so who they're advertising to, what kinds of programs. It also lets us know that students are a really big investment for the government. And the feds are doing what they can to ensure that Canada remains one of the top leaders in enticing students to come to Canada. And it's very interesting because as an immigration lawyer, visa in, visa out, work permit application in, work permit application out, my career has really significantly changed. Now I also have to worry about things like marketing, making sure that it's culturally appropriate marketing as well. So having all these different skill sets seems to be more of the norm. Back in the day, being an immigration lawyer was, I think, a lot easier for us as lawyers in that everybody wanted to come to Canada. A lot of people wanted to hire lawyers, but now there's so much information available on websites, and the government's starting to do things a little bit easier and faster. So it's really changing how immigration lawyers approach business and how we manage being an immigration lawyer in this modern age. So let's talk about COVID-19 and the impact currently on students. And I'm going to tell you, it's a very interesting situation because IRCC, Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, manages, the study permit piece. CBSA, Canada Border Services Agency, monitors the border and is responsible for enforcement and the security and safety of Canadians. So IRCC might issue someone a study permit, and then they arrive at the border and CBSA might say you can't come in. So what we're seeing right now, so this is going on now since COVID, since mid-March, is a conflict between these two departments. So IRCC is saying these individuals may enter Canada, but CBSA has different policies and rules right now in place. So watch for that. Make sure that you definitely speak to someone in the know, like an immigration lawyer or consultant or paralegal. Study permits issued before the 18th of March 2020 are exempt from the travel restrictions. However, in reality, you're not coming in. So I wouldn't try it. If you're already inside Canada, fantastic. The good news to this is if you are in Canada on a study permit, the 20-hour maximum work restriction is removed, but only if you are employed in an essential service. So I've provided the link there that you can see to make sure you look up what's essential, because and you have to demonstrate that at the border. So CBSA is basically saying what's essential, what's your purpose, why can't you do this remotely? So including explanations about that is very important. And you will need it if you're doing, so let's say you're currently on a study permit and you've decided you can work 30 hours a week because maybe you're a nurse and practicing and they've asked you to volunteer or to step up and get paid for that time. Fantastic, you can certainly do that. Make sure you document that it is during the COVID period and that you are an essential member. So make sure you get a letter from the employer as well for that. So this worker rule change is in effect until the 31st of August, 2020. So document it. If you are in Canada and your in-class course was moved to online, it will not affect your postgraduate work permit eligibility. So in order to qualify for postgraduate work permit, you have to make sure that no more than 50% of your studies was done online inside Canada. So knowing that 50% rule, if over this last semester your classes went from in class to online, don't worry about it. You will still qualify for that postgrad work permit. But you have to keep the evidence. So make sure you keep evidence to demonstrate that it was in fact in class prior to COVID, and that because of COVID, it's now moved to an online study. My recommendation is that institutions provide a letter to those individuals. So that's for students who are currently inside of Canada. You can submit your renewals. You can still submit your postgrad work permits. Applications, absolutely. There's a little bit of flexibility for those who are essential workers. The students who are outside of Canada who have been approved for a study permit, but don't have the actual document yet because they have not traveled to Canada. So what happens is a student will apply for a study permit at a consulate or embassy abroad. They'll be approved. They get a letter, a pre-approval letter. They show up at the border, they present that letter to CBSA, and then the officer will print off the actual study permit document and admit the person into Canada. With your pre-approval letter, the government has no way. I know that institutions, we spoke to the minister the other day, and the Minister of Immigration said, look, I know that some of the educational institutions have asked us to print study permits because their policies say you can't start. You cannot start studying here unless you have your study permit in hand. But unfortunately, with the way that the regulations are written and the processes in place, we cannot do that. So they won't print them off. But if a person has that pre-approval letter, then it looks fairly good that they're going to get that study permit at the border. The government has also said, the minister has also said, you can begin your classes while you're outside. So if you've been pre-approved, feel free to start your classes online outside. But the minister also said, be careful, only up to 50%. So students going forward, only up to 50% of your program of study can be online if you want to get a postgrad work permit at the end. If you don't want that postgrad work permit, don't even worry about it. And also, as a suggestion, if you are a DLI, like I said, maybe audit your current programs or your current enrollment to see how you've structured your online courses for those various programs. Issue letters to those individuals who will be impacted. Maybe start online studies for those who are not in Canada yet, or maybe postpone it for a small period of time. But definitely do an audit to see sort of what's going on. More updates from the minister. We've been bugging him a lot lately. Actually, every week. So, because it's been changing literally every single week, we're kind of getting updates or new instructions. And as you can imagine, it's a global pandemic, and it kind of took the government by surprise, and we've never had one, and it's a newer minister, so he's learning the job, and now all of a sudden he has to manage all these implications. The applications to extend your postgrad work permit, so let's say your passport expired at the 2-year mark, but you're entitled to a 3-year postgrad work permit, must be done with paper applications at this time. Do not submit your request online. Also, some institutions, as I mentioned, won't admit students without the study permit in hand, so they can begin their studies remotely. You know, the government is asking for institutions to have some flexibility on this because they can't do anything about that study permit. And once again, I want to emphasize that maximum of 20 hours a week will still apply to anyone who is just working a job that's not considered an essential service. You know, what's interesting about this is, as I mentioned, we're talking to the minister every week about all the different things that immigration lawyers are experiencing on the ground floor with our clients. And we're reaching out to the minister's office and having discussions. So we hold Zoom chats or conference calls with the minister and the policy people. And it's very interesting in that, again, funny enough, I have a college degree in public relations, which has been so helpful with making sure that government relations piece. I'm also on the Ontario Bar Association. So it's been really helpful. That skill set that I learned has been really helpful during this particular time period where a lot of my colleagues and our clients are very stressed about, can I leave Canada? Can I come back? You know, what about my family members, etc. So managing those government relations and getting clear and concise information, that skill set has been absolutely invaluable. And you don't really think of an immigration lawyer as you know, a government relations person, but it absolutely can be. Let me check. Oh, one of the things that we did ask is full-time students who are supposed to be enrolled full-time now, but have been deferred because of institution closures, can this be considered scheduled break to allow students work full-time and not just essential service workers? That's if the institution is closed. And the answer was no. 20 hours a week, that's your maximum, no exceptions. That's it. The only exception to the 20 hours a week is if you are working in an essential service. Please watch for that, because when you're issued your pay stub, those hours will be on your pay stub, and we don't want you to tip over that 20-hour work week. Otherwise, you won't get your postgrad work permit. Study permit holders may also need to just start remotely. And that's for people who've had them removed, have had them approved, but can't get to Canada. We're looking into more details about how this will affect if it keeps going on into September, October, November, depending upon the various types and composition of programs. And that is literally going to be by the seat of our pants. So the government has said, we've never experienced this before. We're not sure what to do. It's going to be step by step. So stick with us. Post-COVID considerations. So when we're heading back to school, online studies are efficient, great way to manage post-COVID. So starting September, maybe even January, you might discover that offering more online studies is fantastic, but for international students, it's really not beneficial. It actually can be quite detrimental for them because the federal government hasn't quite caught up to that technology change just yet. And sometimes training and teaching requires in-class attendance. So, I mean, how do you teach absolutely everything to do with massage therapy or welding or nursing online? You can do bits and pieces of it online, but there are, practical reasons for having in-class sessions to sometimes show people what to do, and sometimes, that feeling or how little nuances that need to be in person. So keep that in mind. And again, online studies can't be the only solution either. We just might have to get a little bit more creative. Maybe institutions split the class so that way foreign nationals, only need to attend in person and you can spread them out. Or maybe the class gets split 50-50. So on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, these individuals show up, Tuesdays and Thursdays, these individuals, etc. Maybe the class needs to rent additional space, so that way there's enough space in between students. That's going to be a personal decision. So each institution needs to really sit down and consider the future of how these in-class studies will or won't. So I've seen some schools globally are putting in mandatory provisions before the students walk into the school. There are certain things that they have to do, such as sanitize their hands, put on a fresh mask, etc. Because this, we're shifting from this time period where temporarily online studies are okay, but for international students, they need that in class if they're going to get that postgrad work permit, and also if you're going to qualify for permanent resident status. So even if the student doesn't want the postgrad work permit, if they want permanent resident status, online studies can also impact that. keep that in mind. One of the other things too is creating relationships. Learning to, so part of the student experience is both on-campus involvement. I understand job hunting online, virtual interviews for jobs are taking place, and people are learning how to actually do their jobs online. That's fantastic. But how do you create relationships online? How do you make sure that there's that level of trust or knowledge? I know as a lawyer, when a lot of my clients are all over the place. So some of them are in Canada, but the vast majority of them are not in Canada. So I have had to learn how to create relationships online and how to make sure I have that connection. Does that person understand I not only have the knowledge to do the job that's being asked, but do they trust me? And are we a fit? Is the way that we operate. Does that person prefer telephone most of the time and I prefer email, or vice versa? So making sure that you're a fit as well becomes very important. So creating relationships virtually, I think, is also a skill set that is going to be needed. Funny enough, the immigration bar in Canada, the Canadian Bar Association, set up also a buddy-buddy system amongst my colleagues. So all the immigration lawyers were kind of connected on this big email stream. And we're setting up various Zoom calls to support each other, make sure we help each other out with various, because these changes are coming fast and furious. So it's really fantastic to have that type of connection. Even though we're shifting to maybe more things online in the future, having that personal touch, having that connection becomes very important. And I think it's we got to keep that in mind as we move forward. Permanent resident status options. So once we've looked at the data, we know international students are incredibly important to our economy. That is a target market for the government. They specifically want more international students to invest in. They want to make sure that the educational institutions are offering these fantastic programs, continue to do that. And then they want these individuals to get their postgrad work permit and their permanent resident status. I've selected these particular options because they have student options. So Express Entry has 4 separate categories, some of which require 1 year of work already in Canada, and you can apply after that. Some of them don't. The Federal Skilled Trades requires certain pieces of education. You have to have your education and job offer in certain occupations, trades occupations. So like electrical, construction, equipment operation, technical jobs, and natural resources and agriculture would fall under the Federal Skilled Trade Worker. Individuals are also able to apply directly to the provincial nominee programs. So interestingly enough, I'm seeing a lot more PR programs being shifted down to the province. And the provinces are creating student streams. So a lot of the provinces and territories have a master's or a doctorate, a stream for permanent resident status. They also have streams where if you studied in Canada, got your degree or diploma or certificate in Canada, and now you're working, so long as your job level's at the requisite level, they'll also sponsor you and you're destined to that province. What's interesting is you'll notice that the IES, one of the things that they wanted to do is to get more international students to the other provinces rather than the main cities, rather than Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver. They want to make sure that they spread out. So the provincial nominee programs are matching that as well. They're allowing for students to apply for PR status through those various provinces. And it's really fantastic. It's a great opportunity for students to get their permanent resident status. The startup visa category, if a student has a really fantastic, innovative technical idea, and they can get one of the designated partners to sponsor that idea, you can get your permanent resident status and some funding towards that particular business idea through the startup visa program. The two newer programs are Atlantic Immigration Pilot and the Rural. The Atlantic Immigration Pilot went so well that the government's decided to renew it. And if you've studied in the Atlantic provinces, they do have an international student stream for the Atlantic Immigration Pilot. And the Rural and Northern Immigration Pilot also has a student stream. If you've studied in one of those rural communities, and there's a list of the communities on the website, then you can get community participation and sponsorship and apply to the federal government for your PR status. Lots of wonderful options. What I've also noticed is that immigration is getting more careers and skills based. So that's because that's where the future of the Canadian workforce is. International students are really perfectly situated for permanent resident status in Canada. And my opinion is that post-COVID, international students are really going to help our economy recover. Ensuring that institutions are offering these advanced knowledge courses, I think will be a key in making sure that they're marketing in those new regions that the government is looking to target would be fantastic. And the other thing too that I've really noticed is how technology is really changing. I'm going to sort of, I'll show you the top 10 list, and technology is there. I'm starting to see new innovative tech ideas, that startup visa program. I was reading the other day about styrofoam and how companies are looking to get rid of styrofoam because it's not the most environmentally friendly, and how there's a mushroom byproduct that can be created to be, styrofoam-like and used for packaging. So universities, colleges, and various trade schools are working with other industry sectors on these really creative and unique environmental tech kind of ideas, and the government is really trying to foster that. They absolutely like that. And they're also looking to make sure that they offer funding in that direction as well. So again, the biggest emphasis I have to say right now, because of COVID, is for the online studies, watch out. A program of study exclusively distance learning, whether the person's in Canada or out, is never eligible for a postgrad work permit. If more than 50% of the program is outside of, is online, not eligible, unless it is during this particular time period, then you would be okay. But when you submit that postgrad application, please make sure you get a letter from your institution advising that your in-class went to online purely because of COVID. And I would also include the order in council that the minister has posted on the website. Educational credentials obtained in a study or training program where the distance learning amounted to more than half. Again, you tip over that 50% online mark and you won't qualify to even apply for express entry. So all those 4 categories are suddenly off the table. And for federal skilled worker category, distance learning, even if you can get through the express entry system, and maybe for federal skilled worker, your federal skilled worker application, the distance education points might qualify if there's a significant part online, it might not. So just avoid it. That 50% marker is a really good point, that tipping point. Try and stay underneath that. Again, I think it's because even if educational institutions have caught up to, being technologically savvy, unfortunately, I don't think the government is quite there with respect to online learning. So really keep that in mind. Express entry, the top 10 invited occupations. This is a list from 2018. The 2019 data is not out yet, but I can tell you when I compared the 2016, 2017, 2018 data, not much changed in our top 10. So a third is, you're looking at just over a third of the individuals invited through express entry are these occupations over the last few years. and software engineers, IT systems, computer programmers. Obviously, it's technology, business, and financial services continue to dominate. That's about a third of those invitations, and that's pretty fantastic. And these are the individuals who found jobs in Canada, or the skills are, you know, what we're looking for in Canada. And it's interesting because technology is changing my job as an immigration lawyer. So Rome, for example, has smart helmets. I actually posted that on LinkedIn today. They have smart helmets that they're wearing at the border point, where they can look at someone and determine if they have a fever or not. That's one mechanism that they're using to monitor travel at the border points. We also have something at the Canada-US border and the US-Mexico border called Avatar. An Avatar is a computer system where you walk up to the computer system and you're asked questions about your purpose for entering Canada, how long are you going to be here, and the computer will read your micro expressions and your heart rate to determine whether or not it thinks you are lying. And if it does, if Avatar thinks you're lying, then you will go off to secondary to meet with a human being to have additional conversation about your reason and purpose for entering Canada. Facial recognition software at the border points, soon enough, you'll be able to board your plane with your face. You won't need to use your boarding pass anymore, either on your phone or on your passport or the hard copy. You'll just be able to walk in, they'll look at your face, and off you go. It's currently being tested. So when we talk about the top 10 and software engineers, information systems, computer programmers, media developers, we are talking about those kinds of advancements. We're talking about making sure that these individuals are trained in this kind of technology. It's changing the world, and it's definitely changing my job quite a bit. And I'm both excited and a little concerned, so I'm having to pivot myself on this. And the other piece of this too is translation services, careers in translation, making sure that you have proper things being translated into various languages and understanding what other governments are doing in order to make sure you know how to position yourself in the marketplace has become very important, especially during this crisis. You don't want to get translation pieces wrong, and that's, you know, another bit of a job opportunity there. So let's talk about the future of work. On the one side, the left-hand side, you'll see truck drivers, commercial drivers, welders. This data is pre-COVID. So I looked at Brookfield Institute, Randstad, Workopolis data, all this varied data sets, because although I'm an immigration lawyer, doing some data analysis is becoming very important to look at trends. And basically, these are the careers that we're being told for 2020, 2021, 2022 are going to be in demand. And to be perfectly honest, there were a few more, but I think because of COVID, I've taken off some of them, like administrative assistant was apparently in demand. I don't think it will be. I've taken it off of the list. I think that after COVID, there will be a lot more people who are unemployed who might be able, who have those skills to fill those particular positions, which is why I didn't include them on the list. But feel free to go to Randstad and the Brookfield Institute to take a look at the complete lists. On the right-hand side, if you're looking a little bit further down the road, let's be a little bit more futuristic. You'll see things like artificial intelligence engineers, programmers and architects around artificial intelligence. Immigration Canada is using AI to approve applications. I know as a lawyer, there are certain artificial intelligence programs that will tell me what words to use in a motion before the federal court if I have a particular judge. So looking at this, the AI pieces, it's becoming very sophisticated, very helpful. Urban farmers, land's at a premium, the cost to transport food can be quite expensive, so hydroponic technology is going to be beneficial. Alternate reality architects, we have Google Glass becoming, you can purchase Google Glasses where you see different things. Remote drone pilots, although controversial, I think that drones have the potential to really kind of disrupt the transportation and delivery industry. Organ farmers, they're currently testing the ability to grow organs for transplant surgeries. 3D printing, they're printing affordable housing now. So when you think of printing, sometimes we think of printing jobs or careers in printing as printing paper and printing products, printing houses, printing various accessibility items for individuals as well is becoming quite popular. So it's not just that traditional look at printing, and I think it's becoming very interesting. I also think that this tells us that as we look at the future of work in these careers, as you're looking at what educational institution has to offer, what programs should we be offering, when should we be offering them, what kinds of jobs am I going to get if I'm a student, you have to be creative. Creativity, I think, is in all areas of work. And it's interesting because I have a kind of funny story where I had an individual, and he had a DUI, and he was from Europe, and he had to come to Canada for a particular job. But because of this driving under the influence conviction, which had been fairly recent, it was in the last couple of years, we had to do special paperwork to get him into Canada. But I also had to convince the government that he wasn't a risk to Canadians here. And with a DUI only being, a year old, it's really hard to convince the government of Canada that this person won't commit the same offense here. So my client and I got a little bit creative and we had a discussion. And lo and behold, do the paperwork, he gets to the border and the officer calls me and says, "Cathryn, are you serious in this submission?" And I said, "Yes." Funny enough, the individual, what he agreed to was to give up his driver's license. And we had arranged for his employment contract in Canada to include a car and driver for him. So although he could go and have a drink or two, he would not be driving. So that was how we creatively came up with a solution that worked for that client. And it was perfectly fine because he was getting older and didn't want to drive anymore anyway. So it worked very well. But I thought it was very interesting because sometimes you have to really, really think outside of the normal spectrum of things. Another thing that is going to change the way that we work in the careers are natural disasters. Over the last 10, 20 years, I think we've heard a lot more about them. Tsunamis, global pandemics, epidemics. The BC wildfires, there was a shortage of people who knew how to address that and skill sets to make sure that it didn't spread. It's impacting the economy, these natural disasters, and creating demands for new types of work. So I think keeping that in mind as well is interesting. And lifelong learning as well. It's not like it used to be where you'd have the one job. As I mentioned, I've been, an immigration lawyer. I've been doing immigration work for over 20 years, but as a lawyer for approximately, 12, 15 years. And even I'm still learning a lot and having to change the way I do things because of technology, and making sure that people continue to evolve throughout their careers, and maybe even offering those courses to help individuals sort of pivot within their career. I think we're going to start to see a little bit more of that happening. So I think we're going to maybe move on to questions, and thank you. I hope that was helpful and informative.
Well, Thank you, Cathryn. That was both a data-rich and a super informative presentation. And I should piggyback on your comment about demographics before I go to a couple of questions. It's such an important point that should not be lost on any of you. Canada has an aging labor force, right? And, you know, as a matter of policy, we really need young people to fill the void, right? Otherwise, we are an upside down economic pyramid above and beyond what, you know, the devastation that has obviously been and tragically been caused by COVID-19, right? So a great point that you made. I'm going to go to one question. It's a great question. This is from Caron Barnett. I returned to my program in September 2020 as I am on summer break right now. Can I work full time for the summer without this affecting my postgraduate work permit next year? I am not an essential worker. Putting you on the spot, Cathryn.
Love it. I'm ready for it. If your program of study concluded at the end of April, naturally, without COVID, then yes, during this time period, up until the start, your next start date, you can work full time. That's not a problem. However, if your program of study, let's say it doesn't finish until the end of June, and you only have July and August off, then you can only work full time during July and August. So whatever the normal study break would have been, your normal summer study break would have been, you may work full time during that.
Thank you. Great. And you also mentioned, you made mention of something called the Student Direct Stream, which presumably responds to a number of policy considerations, not the least of which is the aging demographic, right, in Canada, and the need for students. So from start to finish, what's the duration of that? So how long does it take now, Cathryn? Does anybody know? Does the minister have, respectfully, 2 feet in the air on this? And is it likely to change?
So the study direct stream is taking roughly 20 calendar days to process applications, which is quite fast, from those lists of countries. So when you look at India, China, Pakistan, etc., that list of countries, more often than not, you're looking at a 2 to 3 month processing time. But because of this particular stream, the goal for the feds is to say, look, we recognize that international students have a significant impact on our economy, and they are our future. So we need to get them here as quickly as possible. We need to gobble up these students and entice them to come to Canada as quickly as possible and get them their documents in hand faster than Australia, New Zealand, and all of these other countries which are up and coming, because they've also recognized that students are really the way to go. I also think that's why there's those, the EduCanada scholarships as well with the government. I think that's important as well, is making sure that so the processing timelines are significantly shortened for individuals coming from those countries. You have to make sure that you clearly identify in your application that you're applying under the study direct stream, and have all of your proper documentation in order. One of the requirements is that you have to have a GIC with a bank that the government has designated. So the government of Canada has certain banks in each of these countries where they have a specific GIC that the individual has to put 10,000 Canadian dollars into that GIC, and the bank will allow certain transfer of funds every 2-3 months to the student from that particular account. So making sure you fulfill those requirements and submit the application, and it'll be lickety split.
Thank you, Cathryn. That seems like warp speed to me. That seems like a very fast process relative to other countries. We had another question about distance learning. So if distance learning becomes the new normal, what's likely to change on the policy front, right? Because there are some, as you have pointed out, highly restrictive rules on students and educational institutions relating to distance learning. So what's your call on that?
I think the government's going to be slow to take that up. So I don't think that, I think distance learning is fantastic, absolutely fantastic. I've participated in myself, but I've also been to the Federal Court of Appeal on it for my clients, where distance learning is not looked upon the same way as in class. And let me explain the government's position on that. The government is basically saying, we want people to come into Canada and live in Canada. We want you to benefit from our incredible educational institutions. But what we really want you to do is to make those personal connections so you stay here forever, so you make friends in the community, etc. You really integrate into society because we want you to stay here forever. And they do. They want them to get PR status. They want them to live, work here, contribute to the economy, and stay here forever. That's the goal. And with online courses, it makes that integration piece very challenging. How else is that going to happen? So my guess is that it's going to be slow on the uptake from the feds.
They almost seem to be at odds with each other when somebody cannot physically be here to rent an apartment, to buy food, to contribute to the GDP of Canada. Cathryn, very insightful presentation as always. I hate to do this, but we're at 1 minute before the hour. So I want to thank all of you for participating, for attending, particularly the people who have attended from the Far East, where I know it's past midnight. Thank you for joining us today. I want to thank our speaker, Cathryn Sawicki, and everyone else. This session is going to be available on the Career Path Intelligence YouTube channel as well. And we welcome your feedback. Tell us what you want to see. Thanks again, Cathryn. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Harris. And to everyone watching today, stay healthy.
Thank you.